Thank you very much. I'm overwhelmed to be here really because I've been in this state for over 30 years. Much of my learnings came from Kings Park, Bold Park, at the same time when Steve was there. Spent a lot of time walking around Bold Park. I think I did about 8 years of field work. So I guess I've learned about landscapes as I've gone, and I'm taking that knowledge that I've learned here in Western Australia into the world that I'm in, which is a really different knowledge to all the other people I'm working with. So that in itself is really, really important, I think. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on whose land we meet here and respect those past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge there have been many communities that I've worked with across the West, the different communities I seem to be very transdisciplinary. But the people who've got me to where I am today are all the different health communities of Perth. That includes very much alternative medicines and alternative practices. And that is where I am where I am today. And I gave a similar talk, or a different talk to this, but a talk at the Perkins Institute of Medical Research, and was able to thank them very much. So you've heard some of the roles, and I'm really not going to dwell on that, I'll just leave that. But the things that I'm doing in the big international space all come from what I'm doing in the very local space here in Western Australia. Is that volume okay? No. Thank you. I guess why am I doing what I'm doing is a really important question as well. I think it stems from my own personal values, my own upbringing. I've always put family first throughout the entire period of getting where I am. I'm a bit of a late achiever. I don't think I finished my PhD till 2008. You can see me, you can put an age on that if you like. So I've really, my motivation is that we need a planet for the future. We need biodiversity, and we need to make sure it's preserved for the long, long term. I guess also part of my motivations is to make sure that everything, any science I work with or any science I see or interpret is evidence-based. And that's exactly what Steve's just been pointing out here in this. We need the evidence to actually be able to do things properly. So I guess my thinking is always, do we have the evidence for this piece of opinion or this piece of theory or this other science? And that is what I take with me. Now I'm going to take a little journey of sort of getting to where I am now. I guess this topic of invasive species, it's been one that's been on the back of my mind and my memory for a very long time. I'm a bit tired of it, but it's there and it's going to stay there. So I go back to where I grew up in Sydney. I grew up on the harbour, and I used to run every day around the foreshores, if you know where Perth Zoo is. Sydney Zoo is just around that area there. And I used to run every day through that reserve. And you go there now, it's still there. It's still as good as it was then. But the other thing about that was my uncle at that time was very busily pulling out lantana throughout the whole of those places where I was growing up and my relatives as that. But I also lived where the Bradley sisters were working at the same time. So these sorts of things, I guess, have all been part of the emergence to get where I am now. So I guess this topic of invasive species, around about 2012, there was a very big push around the globe from some scientists to say we really didn't need to worry about invasive species. The climate's changing, let's just let these new species come in. So that was my motivation for starting a group with the International Union of Conservation, not on species-dominated invasive species, but looking at the whole system. So that was 2012. I really drove myself on that, pushed hard, and really, I guess the work that I did within that has now brought that topic back into a really, really important place around the planet. Much of the conversation that was going about whether we should worry, or is it, as Steve would be aware from his time in Europe, often biodiversity, when it's counted, includes the invasive species. It's not just what we would call our native species. So I guess that's the world that I've driven that through. And when I started this, I was always thinking Western Australia was a fantastic place to be a base on working on that topic, because we could set up best practice projects in all those, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's about 26 bioregions we have in Western Australia. We could really implement some really good processes and projects in every one of those bioregions to show others around the planet, and that thinking is still there. So here I am sitting in Perth in red. Over the the time frame, that has built up to a membership from 50 countries, so you can see where we're all located and we're all talking to each other. And it's that group of people that I've really been working with over the last 8 years to really get this topic of invasive species back onto the agenda where it really seriously belongs. So part of this this taking up of that group, that invasive IUCN group, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, for those who don't know, it was a very big congress in Sydney in 2014. I presented another thing there, but what I did is work with some dancers, and we created an amazing dance piece on marine invasive species. It was absolutely amazing. We brought experts in, we had a panel, and we had discussion following the dance, but it was obvious from the audience, they got the message from that really creative piece of dance work that we did. Now this is, and I've forgotten the year, but maybe 2014. I was at a meeting in London, Planet Under Pressure, I think it was. It was the real start of where the planet's gone to now and where it's up to now. And I had a conversation with a lady, and from that, through the conversation I had with her, UN Women was begun. Now, we've had so much since that beginning of United Nations Women and looking after women. Here in Western Australia, it perfectly matches the date that this lady and I had a conversation. You've heard everyone here talking about women in science, women in this, women in everything. That has come from a very important time frame that I was involved with and been a very key part of that, and that is known around the world. And I'm very well respected globally for my role as a woman doing what I'm doing. And then this is another really, I think, a really strategic, important moment in my life when I was invited to Myanmar for the launch, and we have two very key women here. On this side is, names dropping out of my head at the moment, Vice Chancellor of James Cook University, and on the other side, I'm not going to introduce this lady, but I was there sitting in a very small audience as an invited person to hear Aung San Suu Kyi launch the State of the Tropic report. The conversation that she, and the words she had, I've put here. These are the words that I pulled out of what she said when she was launching that. I'm a politician launching this. I'm not the right person, she said. I'm not an academic. But she did make some strategic points that really matched where my life was and where I was going at that point. And these points still are very much how I like to work in laws. It was for me, a really quite influential moment in my life. So after that, I was taken on a journey with many people, but I was taken to many mangrove restoration sites around Myanmar. And these are just some of the things I saw, and I learned a lot about when you restore mangroves, how much it improves people's life and well-being. But that was really a very integral part in my life in terms of understanding. That last slide, that's how children go to school. They're on the way to school. So this is sort of the journey of the trip and all sort of putting in place. So while I was doing all that on invasive species, this big platform was just getting up and running. It was a really important platform, but I don't know, everyone I speak to in Western Australia has never heard about it. We're living in a biodiversity hotspot and nobody knows about this. This is influencing the planet except Western Australia. This is a concern to me, so please hear about this, please Google it, please look it up. It is the most influential body now, and this is a body I've been working with now for a number of years. It's countries coming together, putting out and doing assessments, as we call them, on what it is the governments around the world want to know about so they can look after our biodiversity. So in that, we've heard about restoration this morning, I became what's called a coordinating lead author on a global assessment on land degradation and restoration. So that went on for over 3 years. My role in that was to be in charge of the first chapter. The first chapter was, what are the benefits to people of avoiding land degradation and conducting restoration? This is where we're really trying to bring the people into this story. It's not just about the biophysical. IPBES is known globally for its work on working with Indigenous communities. and they have what's called an Indigenous and Local Knowledge Task Force. And I'm a key member of that group, and I work with Indigenous communities around the planet to make sure we bring Indigenous knowledge into all of the work we do. So, yes, that's one thing I did. The thing about these assessments is we write for 3 years. We have external reviews of everything we write twice within that period. Then when we finish writing it, we have to sit in front of those 130 governments and go through word by word the writing in our work. And we have to sit up the top and defend our work back to those governments. And it can take sometimes 48, 60 hours, and we all get very tired. But when it's finished, we feel good. At the same time as that, I was also a lead author of what was happening about for the Asia Pacific assessment, what is happening on biodiversity in the Asia Pacific. My role in that was not restoration, not ecological, it was about values. And I played a very key role in looking into what are the values and the cultural meanings and feelings of people across the whole of the Asia Pacific region. I was doing both of those at the same time. It was fairly enormous. Then, sitting in the middle of all of this, we came up with a big International Union for the Conservation of Nature Congress in Hawaii. And once again, it was enormous, and I managed to pull together, I'm not quite sure how I did this, as long with everything else, but somehow I did, two sessions for Indigenous people. We were really wanting those people to talk to us about what their values are in terms of forests, but we had to sort of keep the invasive species in it. If you talk to a lot of Indigenous people, they will actually say man is an invasive species, so it's not really the definition that you might put through a biosecurity legislation. It's a definite. In this case, we were letting the Indigenous people tell us their perceptions on invasive species. So there was one about forest, but the other one about water was really, really critically important. We had some work there from the West Australian Museum, included that. These are some of the Indigenous people who were part of that session. What I do when I'm making these sessions, it's not just let's do a session. For me, the perspective is how do we get what those people want in that session to be part of future directions. So we were really able to do that, pushed hard and made sure that all the things that the Indigenous people said in those 2 sessions went into the future direction formulation of how the IUCN will work in the future. At that meeting, for the very first time, that was 2016, Indigenous communities can now become members of the IUCN, which they could not before that. So we worked very hard on that. I'm not going to read this, I think it's just a very important statement from one of the ladies who was part of that session. So coming back to this IUCN group, this is something I've been doing very locally on the field work in Perth, and I had a meeting with the Shire of Denmark yesterday and the Shire of Albany yesterday to think about how we can bring this restoration approach where we measure from the beginning of the restoration the ecological and economic effectiveness of our restoration. It's bringing together a lot of the things that Steve was talking about, but it's bringing the money in as well, working with Indigenous and local communities. Last October we won a big award for that. This is where I walked around Trigg Reserve. For those in Perth, it's a big reserve, 170 hectares, and we've set up baseline measurements before we start our restoration. City of Mandurah is taking this on very, very big. They're not writing management plans anymore, they're using this as their management plan. So all of those things throughout all those different spaces and places meant I've met a lot of people along my way. I've met a lot of very, very key scientists around the world, which is absolutely a privilege. When you're working with that person, you're working with really dedicated scientists. I'm not saying others aren't, but we all have to give our time freely. So we are really, really committed to the findings and what we want to do and where we want those findings to go. So now this is 2018. That land degradation assessment report and that Asia Pacific assessment report, we all had to go to Colombia, to Medellin. And this IPBES, I'm sorry, that's the acronym, Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform. We sat there in front of the governments and we had to defend our work. There were only 3 ladies on our team, but that's us. Looking very happy after the governments had given us a tick. And once again, we were really, it was a big occasion, and that is the point when the governments have said, yes, we pass your work, and your work now becomes a public document for everyone here to work with. The work that we give to the public is about policy. It's about science and the interrelations between biodiversity, science and policy. And in this case, this one we're cheering was the land degradation and restoration. We had some key findings in there, absolutely key. They're so relevant to Western Australia. I don't have a lot of time, but I've tried to talk to a few ministers and say, please read these. I don't know who they had. So here we are, really very happy as a team. We were the key team. It was just a very special occasion. But something else happened. So after that, there's a big media release. So I'm sitting there doing the media, part of the media release. For that land degradation assessment, my role was to go through all of the 8 chapters and look for Indigenous knowledge, which was in the public domain, to incorporate across every chapter within that. So I had a huge role in that perspective, and I brought as much things I could find from this part of the world into that. If I hadn't been there, we wouldn't have had anything from this part of the world, but that was key. So when it came to the media, and they were a very, very big media group, my role was to answer any questions that were posed about Indigenous communities and Indigenous people and how they work on the world. So that's what I'm doing, answering that question. Everything went globally around the world from that media release. But something else was going on behind the scenes while we were busy doing this over 5 days. All the governments, the United Nations, whether you like it or not, works in 5 regions. So Australia sits in this group here. I'm sorry. Australia sits here. This group of countries is made up of America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the European Union, the UK, all the European countries. That gamut of countries had to select 5 people to sit right at the very top of IPBES to give technical advice to the future directions of biodiversity. They spent 5 days negotiating this behind the scenes. My name was there. I was not in any way expecting to be chosen, but I was. And I guess one of the reasons I was chosen is I'm not an academic sitting in a university. I'm independent. I have a very wide-ranging view. I work with Indigenous people. A very wide-ranging view of the world. So what IPBES really works at, it wants innovative thinkers. That's what we want. We want to set direction for the future that's going to really make sure biodiversity is well looked after. So since 2008 at that same meeting, I've now been in that role. That role is huge. I've now become, I guess, a bit of a diplomat. We meet frequently. When we turned into 2020 this year, Google sent me a message and told me I'd been around the world 3.5 times last year, and I thought, no wonder I feel tired. But anyway, that's part of the role. This role is critical. So that's what I'm doing now. Our role's sitting there. We are called the multidisciplinary expert panel. So you can see there are 25 of us. We have to come together and we have to give advice to the 135 odd governments on what we're going to do, what we need to do next, based on a science and evidence base to look after biodiversity around the planet. So that's where I'm always thinking forward. I'm not going to give any results or knowledge here, but this is all in my mind when I'm talking to you about the future direction of biodiversity. 2020 is the year that biodiversity is going to go the next step for its very good future. People here in our biodiversity spotlight, I'm really sorry that you're not aware of this. Please start to become aware. So this is us as we're having a meeting in Bonn. We keep going back to Germany in Bonn, and the lady is the executive secretary, a French lady called Anne, and I can't speak French, so I'm not going to try and say her surname, but she's the executive secretary of IPBES, and next to her is Sir Bob Watson, who at this time, when we're meeting, was the chair of IPBES. Absolutely amazing people that I'm working with, and the rest of us are that multidisciplinary expert panel. But this is the thing that we're trying to do with about biodiversity. We're trying to bring as many people who actually don't even know what biodiversity is to understand the importance of nature. So we're starting to use this word nature because everybody knows what nature is. A lot of people have no idea what biodiversity is, or if they do, it doesn't matter. So we're really all the time changing the way we talk, changing the way we do things. So part of it was a very big debate between different groups of scientists over the last 3 or 4 years. Has been this wording that we brought in called nature's contributions to people. And what we're trying to do with that working is really recognise the role that culture plays in the natural environment and bringing that sort of thinking. So all the work we do and all the assessments we write has a framework that we have to follow, all about human wellbeing, good health, etc., and the biodiversity. So a little bit more about this nature's contribution to people. It's a way that we're trying to take a lot of people have been trying to put an economic value on biodiversity. This way we're trying to bring a different value set into this and try to move away. It's not just about economics. One of the things as I go, I seem to have been going to some amazing places and go walking, and when I was hearing about the comments about the spiritual side of the world, I seem to run into so many different people in so many different places who take me the next step of where I want to go. I have had many Indigenous people tell me that you are here as a spirit and you are travelling the world to help us, and that sort of is really rewarding, and that's part of, I guess, I was asked by Basil to give us a bit of a human feeling, so I guess these are the sorts of things of where I am at the moment in life. Once again, we're just really trying to bring this Indigenous into this. We're bringing the nature-based solutions. This is a very important topic. When we talk about restoration, when someone's building a dam or a road or a railway, we are now saying, and it's not me and we, it's the world is saying, we need to look at nature before we do changes on the planet. And the reasons for it, the reasons when things we're saying all have good evidence sitting behind them, and these words that I put here, not my words, these are the words the governments have approved. They've all ticked this off. Unfortunately, Australia was not present in Colombia.
Not surprising.
No, I will make no comment. I'm a diplomat now, but it's difficult as an Australian being in this space. But the space I'm in, I'm so grateful to have an Australian there because the planet loves Australia. Why do they love Australia? Everyone around the world loves Australia. Why do they love Australia? They love Australia because of our unique biodiversity, our unique plants, our unique animals, our traditional owners. That's why they love Australia. So when you're an Australian in this international world, it's really, really important. The views I bring into all our discussions are totally different to anybody else in that room. And that, I guess, is why I was put in that place. So coming back now to this word about nature-based solutions, those countries I mentioned before, and there's a lot of them, now see me as someone who gives them advice. And so there's a big convention called the Convention on Biological Diversity. It had a meeting in Egypt, not long ago, and I was invited as a delegate of the European Union to attend that meeting to give a very keynote talk about this nature-based solutions and the importance of nature-based solutions. That talk had a purpose when you go to these meetings. They have purposes. The talk was there to direct all the governments on this convention to incorporate nature-based solutions into how they will manage the planet in the future. That happened at that meeting. I had to give a key talk on why it was critical. So all the countries at that meeting have now brought nature-based solutions into the way they're going to operate. And Australia is part of this Convention on Biological Diversity. Unfortunately, they were not at this meeting in Egypt. But at least when I stood up, I was able to say this Australia is here, even though I was there as part of the European Union delegation. And this is the Indigenous people at that meeting celebrating as well. And a long-time friend from Sri Lanka, because I've done a lot of work in Sri Lanka with the United Nations, was just there very happy because she won an award. So coming much closer now to this time and space, which is about a year ago, well, it's not even a year ago, but so much has happened around the planet since May 2019. Nobody here knows about it. I'm sorry, but so much is happening. We need to be confident about the future of biodiversity. And this meeting, which was in Paris, was when there was a release of this enormous report, the global assessment of the state of biodiversity. It brought all the thinking from all those other regional reports, the land demand assessment, and it came together. The most innovative thinkers in this space brought this knowledge for the governments to approve. And there's some of us all saying, you know, we're part of this. In our role as this multidisciplinary expert panel, we are sitting there. We sit quietly. We're not in the big domain of it, but we have to sit quietly giving advice all the time to anyone who wants it. I'm not there representing Australia, I'm there for my knowledge and expertise. None of us, these are all members, none of us are there representing our countries. But the interesting thing about that group of countries that I mentioned, that I sit amongst, all the others are European, the other 4 are European. I'm the Australian, the only Australian in that group. This was exciting in Paris. This is when they're sitting on the top and all the governments are feeding information back and saying, we don't want this word, we don't want that word, etc. So these are people, very key people, the 2 people I pointed out earlier at this end, and then the 3, what are called the co-chairs of the whole assessment. Along there. The Saturdays, I don't know. I know when I was studying my PhD and I was doing invasive species, I used to read her work. She was just one of those most amazing people. And when I read her work, I used to think, wow, what an amazing woman. And now when I'm working with her, for me, that's an amazing space to be in, because I'm now working with these people whose literature I used to read and very well connected with them, and they just love to hear what I have to say. So one of the key conclusions of this global assessment was the places on the planet that are best looked after are those places managed by Indigenous people. We heard that in the story at the beginning. This report has brought that out so strongly, and there are so many findings related to that work. So that was a huge event, and a huge mammoth event. It went on for 5 days. We were all totally exhausted. We didn't sleep much. And I had to hop on a plane and go to Valencia, where I met Basil, and I didn't know I was going to meet Basil there. So I went to this meeting.
He's everywhere.
I went to this meeting and I didn't actually know he was there, I don't think, for a day or so. I was really exhausted from what I'd been doing, but I had to go there to give a talk. And the thing I had to give a talk about was about restoration, because sometime in the mix of all of this, I've been chairing a group of experts across Europe working on a restoration. We had a question to answer. It was a really tricky question. If it had been the same question that had been delivered here, different answers. But the question is, what is hampering the effectiveness of restoration across the European Union? So I chaired that group. It took us 18 months to come up with the answers, which was a public document last week, I think. But for me, what was so intriguing about this, I came into this meeting thinking, well, where am I now? Then I was introduced, and I said, thank you. The whole audience just stood up and gave a standing ovation. That's the sort of things that are happening in our personal lives because of what we're doing and because of the way we do it. I guess in my case, I'm doing it as an independent. I'm doing it as someone who's really a lot of people are totally committed, but I guess I haven't got support of a university or an academic situation behind me. So that's what Basil saw as well. And thank you, Basil, for inviting me to come here, because you probably saw something that other people in Australia have never seen. So these were some pretty important people at that meeting. Now, when I'm talking about Indigenous people throughout this story, I guess why do I have connections with Indigenous people? My husband's an anthropologist, and he's retired now, but he has been working with Indigenous communities. All the key work projects that were being done throughout the metropolitan area, southwest WA, up in the Gascoyne, he was the leading anthropologist at that time, making sure that when a new development was happening, all of the Indigenous people, all the families, etc., had a say and got what they wanted. And he was very successful in doing that. So I guess I've come through that world of working with him and assisting him throughout, not only in urban areas, but about Fiona Stanley Hospital, 10 years. We worked on that project, and I watched the restoration that was being done, and I was a little bit gobsmacked that I wasn't helping with the seed dispersal from the Banksy woodland. The consultants were doing that, and I watched that thinking, oh. But anyway, I was working on the Indigenous side. So I guess that's where my connection to that is. I've also worked with Indigenous people in the Kimberley, and I'm still doing that at the moment. So this is a journey. This is all a time scale. So I then worked for the Indigenous Pact of the Asia Pacific. I went as a consultant to work with them to assess how their projects were going for Indigenous people across Vietnam and Myanmar. This was only last year, and I'm stuck hiding there in the corner with all these Indigenous women. This project was all about women. empowering women in these very, very poor communities. So I had some very amazing experiences. Once again, I'm doing a review, so I'm reviewing the project. I have talked with these people to work out whether the project's working for them, if not, what recommendations. No one spoke English except myself. I had a translator.
So I didn't catch where the people are.
This is Vietnam, the one before was Myanmar. So there's a mixture of photos between Vietnam and Myanmar. What I will say about the Myanmar, and that picture with all the women, okay, I got on a plane, went to Yangon, then we flew up to the top, 2 hours in a plane, then we got in a car and we drove for 6 hours, and there was a bit of rain around, and there was rain coming. So we couldn't drive anymore, so the rest of my 3 or 4 days up there was sitting on the back of a motorbike, going up and down these cliffs and mountains, and I insisted I needed the helmet, they didn't, but they found me. So I mean, these are the life experiences I'm having in amongst all of this other. This was only last year. And that's Vietnam. And these were the people I was working with in Vietnam. One of the people there was a translator, the lady sitting next to me. So I had a translator, so that also meant interpreting, because often their English wasn't as good. These people are really critically important in my life. We have in the Philippines what's called the ASEAN. So ASEAN is the Association of Eastern Asian Countries. It's a bit like an EU of countries. It's made up of 10 countries. So we have a critically important place called the ASEAN Centre for Biodiversity. And they are responsible for really enhancing and making sure biodiversity across those ASEAN countries are looked after well. So I just started a consultancy with them, and I was saying about it the other day. My world is almost there, so I had a Skype call with them. I was supposed to go, and my role there is to work. There's 49 heritage parks across the 10 countries. My role is to assess how well it's been managed. I was supposed to go to Malaysia next week to speak and do consultations across all of those countries. We had a conversation yesterday. I will not be going. The world is sitting still now because of the coronavirus. We have a finding in our IPBES global assessment that actually said this is going to happen. These words are all there. They're on the webpage. You can find that. We're now watching the planet behave the way, or the people of the planet behave the way our report said what we need to do to look after biodiversity. Planes are stopping running, pollution's coming down, illegal wildlife is being stopped through China and the Philippines. I'm not saying it's good that people are sick at all, but the planet, the nature is slowing down right now. It's getting a little bit of help. We need to keep a positive focus on everything we do. So these are the people now who've invited me up to Hanoi and other places to speak about it best for all the ASEAN countries, and I've just started this new project with them all over the last week or so. But in our conversation yesterday when I was at Denmark by Skype, we're going to have to do all our consultations remotely, which is a shame because I would have loved to visit all those heritage parks, but that's the way it is. These are just some of the Indigenous peoples and communities that I've been working with over this period of time. Now this is a really important map that we put into the Land Degradation and Assessment Report. What we tried to do was find the interrelationships between biodiversity and the number of Indigenous languages. And we put that together, and if you see the very pinky colour, so if you look to these colours in this corner, look to where they are, and look to here we are in Australia. These are the places on the planet that have the most significant interrelations. Where there's high biodiversity, there's also high number of Indigenous languages. You know, there's a real connection between that from a biophysical and people perspective, and this was one of the maps we made for the land degradation assessment, really trying to show the importance of Indigenous communities and how they work with their landscapes. Now, after this big global assessment report was released in May last year, there has been so much media and so much feedback. We are having IPBES authors are going into parliaments and presenting the findings to parliaments across the globe, not here, but across the globe, and those parliaments are now starting to direct the way they do their business in their countries. They are looking at their policies based on these findings. This is huge, what is happening, absolutely huge. But also in the centre there, you can see this was the United Nations Human Rights People said, a statement from the Special Rapporteur on the rights of Indigenous people. Failing to protect biodiversity can constitute a violation of the right to a healthy environment, a right that is legally recognised by 155 states and should now be globally recognised as fundamental. This is saying Indigenous people really have to have their rights recognised. This is all what happened after this report was released. And then a little bit after it was released, the person around the world who's really leading the charge on that we must look after biodiversity is President Macron. He's working towards a Paris-type agreement in his role, and he's working very closely with IPBES, and he's using all of our global assessment findings to reinforce what he's asking the countries around the planet to do. We are now working towards a Paris-type agreement for biodiversity. Now, that will happen this year. This year, 2020, is the big year. There are meetings now. This is not just randomly happening. All of these things have been brought together, and our role on the multidisciplinary expert panel is to provide advice on how we take this forward. So we must remain positive about biodiversity. We must let people here in the state know what's going on and become part of this. So this is a statement that President Macron made. This was at it was the big meeting of governments in August, and they've signed this METS Charter, and this is leading towards that statement. That statement is now going to the IUCN, which is where I mentioned before, is having a big congress in Marseille, if it happens, and this President Macron will be there to take this further through the IUCN and others. So there you can see, this is the lead up. So there were ministers at that meeting, including one from Australia who signed it. So I hope they understood what they were signing, but they have now signed this. They have now signed this statement. And if you don't mind me saying, the fires, I was at a meeting in January. We have a lot of support from governments all around the world that want Australia to do things differently. They are standing up as one. Australia has, since those fires happened, Australia has been in the media for the wrong reasons all around the planet. My interpretation, from a lot of knowledge I have and all the work we've been doing, is because we have neglected to think about climate change. It's not just about emissions, and I've got a finding here. It's not emissions, it's not about that. It is partly about that. Because we've been neglecting to do something serious on climate change and develop policy and legislation, it has impacted, and also we've been neglecting the management of our landscapes. These two things have come together to make that huge environmental disaster. I know it's a disaster for people as well, a huge environmental disaster. But really, it wouldn't have been like that if our country had been looking after itself better. Now I do a lot of social media, as many of us do. We need to get our messages far and wide, and that's what we're doing. But this is a bit of a tracking thing on what is happening in the media. This was last August. It was just after, the global assessment was released in May. So this is what was happening in August. Across the planets, the biggest black you see is where the most media is happening, and you can see it's this thing called IPBES, even more than Greta Thunberg. You don't see the IPCC, the climate change is not there. Right? This is what was trending, and still is, all around the planet. And that picture is made from 5.2 million views or pieces of media around the planet in 49 languages. All of that has been brought together. Who is leading the planet right now? It's IPBES, Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity. So that's just so that you can see we're missing out here in our biodiversity hotspot. So where are we heading now? Right, okay, I'm going to go quickly now. What are we doing next? And I'll run through this quickly. We're doing a real introduction. We're doing a thing on biodiversity and climate change. This is the thing we're not getting here. It's in many places. Biodiversity and loss of biodiversity, degradation of landscapes is contributing significantly, about 40% to change in climate. We're now working on the interactions between food, water and health. It will have and transformative change. This is the word that's going around, and we're also working very closely with businesses. There's a big report happening in the UK. Don't get frightened by that word economics. It's coming from the findings with Professor Dasgupta. I've been asked to contribute to this, and David Attenborough is the voice of that as well. He is really promoting this. The value of biodiversity is not its price, and this is really what we're trying to do. These are just some very quick statements which have been put out and are coming on a daily basis. But I wanted to bring you this, a finding from these assessments. Land degradation is a major contributor to climate change. Please, let's think about that and our biodiversity. It's not all about emissions. We're very focused on solutions. The decade of restoration is happening next year. It's going to be big. I did work on this report, which I mentioned earlier when I was saying I did work on it, Basil. This is only last week or the week before. This is our Executive Secretary saying how pleased we are where we're going. This is what we have to think about, the inherent value of nature. Why is it so important? We must respect nature. This is a quick statement on the way that Indigenous people relate and the way economists relate. This was only in the media 2 or 3 days ago about the world leaders are coming together for this Biodiversity 2020 big year, for that Paris type agreement. The business world is going to join that. That is the business world we need to get on side now. They are the biggest contributor. So once again, a little bit more about the business. We are using nature to face a far greater pace than we can keep up with it. And this is the big deal this year, the New Deal for Nature 2020, and that Paris type agreement for biodiversity. I am finishing, Basil, so I'd just like to let you read that. This is what we need, urgent transformational change. And this was in Bonn with the Executive Secretary. We were having a lot of fun. We've just been nominated for a legal award 2 days ago. This is what I do and how I do it. Thank you very much.